Over the years, Mean Gene and I have shared a lot of stories with you guys. We've shared stories about Rolls-Royce, we've shared stories about Bentley, we've even shared stories about Volkswagen. But we've never shared a story about that venerable mark originally from Newport Pagnell, now Gaydon, Aston Martin. Figuring it would be a very simple fix, call up my guy at Aston Martin and say, hey, we need one of those special ones. We need one of those Vanquish, because after all, you're not going to start at the cheap seats of Aston Martin, now are you? He says, I got a burgundy one. But for you, I think I have one more your speed. It's blue. Trust me, you'll love it, he says. At that point, the two of us were very excited, so we spent the next couple of weeks coming up with this great story about the evolution of Aston Martin. And then, this turns up on our doorstep. You know when something doesn't go according to plan in life? You step back and you think, what's the meaning of this? Well, friends, Mean Gene and I are about to share the meaning of Flugplatz Blue.
This is not your ordinary Aston Martin. Not that Aston Martins are ever ordinary, but this one has a body made entirely of carbon fiber. Now, carbon fiber is made of carbon, but it's woven into a fabric, just like your sheets at home or my shirt. And because it's woven into a fabric, it can be bent and manipulated into fantastic shapes. Now look at the side of this car. You see how gently and flowing these curves are and how smooth the surface is. This continues all the way up to the front and terminates here in this crisp arch going over the wheel well opening and comes back again underneath it with another one. Now the advantages of carbon fiber are it's lightweight, it's strong, and it allows the designers to achieve more of their vision.
Which gets you to 3,834 pounds. Granted, is it like a Corvette or a 911 in the lower threes? No. Is it like my beloved Lotus at like almost $2,000? Definitely not. But that's not what this car is supposed to be. This is a GT car. It's not meant to be a canyon car, even though that's what I'm taking it out and doing today. It's designed to go grand touring, but extremely fast.
So here's the aluminum V12, 6-liter, dual overhead cam, produces 565 horsepower at 6,750 RPMs, 457 foot-pounds of torque at 5,500 RPMs. Now, one thing I wanted you to notice is how clean and uncluttered the engine compartment is. Now these air intake manifolds are beautiful. It's a lovely casting, and they've obviously been bead blasted, and then they have some sort of a powder coating finish on them, but I like this bracket. Look at this bracket. This takes the place of the usual two steel tubes that you see on most cars. It's cast with a rib in the center of it. So it's hollow for lightweight, but it has a rib in the center for extra strength. And as our friend Weldman would say, is beautiful welding.
Remember, this engine kind of goes back a while with Aston Martin. You really have to kind of get on it to get the torque, which in practice means you really need to be working this 12-cylinder engine. Normally 12 cylinders are kind of lazy engines. They don't rev that high, but listen to this thing. You can really push it, and most of the power will come between 4,500 and say 5,500 RPM, which is where peak horsepower comes out.
MotoMan was asking me off camera about the torque and horsepower characteristics of this engine versus the Bentley Mulsanne with the V8. And he was saying that since this is a V12, shouldn't it have more torque than the Bentley V8? And the answer is no. The Bentley V8 is originally an older engine, about a couple of decades older, with a very long stroke to produce a lot of torque. The Bentley's a big, heavy car, and it's got to move from stoplight to stoplight. This is a more peak horsepower engine. It gets its horsepower at a higher RPM because of the double overhead cams, and the stroke of this engine is a short stroke. So it's not about the number of cylinders, it's about the length of the strokes, or different strokes for different folks.
So I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the transmission, it's automatic with a torque converter, ain't half bad. I mean, granted, this push button thing, horrible. But once you set it up and use it as the manual as you want, it's pretty fantastic. I have been using it solely as a manual, granted with paddles, and like I pointed out in the shakedown film, much prefer that the paddles are attached to the steering column and not the steering wheel. But literally, you can use it so much so like a manual that, check this out, if I pull both paddles back, I can coast like a real manual transmission. I think the only car that I know that does that is the PDK. You know, the PDK and the Boxers and things like that. You can actually coast in neutral those. But anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program.
By the way, maybe we should bring this up. It might be interesting. But we're talking about the weight. I restored a car for a client of mine years ago, a DB4 GT. And the GT came with an all-magnesium body. And they pumped the engine up to 300 horsepower. So this car had 300 horsepower, a 4-speed manual transmission, but it weighed 2,700 pounds. You know? And here we are, what do we, let's see, 40, 50, almost between 50, I guess 55, 56 years later, we've got a car that weighs 3,800 pounds. But it's got a little less than 600 horsepower engine in it, which means you've got to really stiffen that chassis up. You know, this thing wants to turn it into a rubber band, you know. But think about that, huh? 2,700 pounds back in the mid-60s.
Back in the 1950s and even into the early 1960s, it was still possible for a manufacturer to send just the chassis of a car to an individual coach builder so that a special body could be made. And that's exactly what Aston Martin did in the case of the DB4 GT Zagato. They built 75 GT chassis, complete with high compression engines, shorter wheelbases, and lighter weight bodies, but then they took an additional 19 chassis without the body, sent them to Zagato for the installation of this incredibly unique coachwork. And Zagato was very, very well known for its avant-garde designs. They're always lighter weight, they're always more aerodynamic and more streamlined looking, and they always help the car get down the racetrack just a little bit faster than the others, which is why I think Aston Martin really had their eye on Zagato.
Now friends, unlike most of the cars you see on our show, that stunning Zagato-bodied Aston Martin that Leslie just showed you, you can actually see that car in person. It's part of the Sports Coupes exhibit at our home, the Petersen Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, California. It's on display now through October 18th, 2014. As for the rest of our story, join Mean Gene, myself, in a bit of a surprise next week for part 2 of Flugplatz Blue. Okay, so here's the script. For a new MotoMan film every week, click subscribe. And to get a sneak peek of what's coming up on the show, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, MotoManTV, all one word.